Good evening. Welcome to the Marian Minor Cook Athenaeum. I'm Rick Vasquez, one of your AF fellows for this year. The American opioid epidemic describes the widespread misuse, addiction, and overdose deaths related to prescription and non-prescription opioids in the United States. The epidemic has been fueled by a combination of factors, including overprescription of opioids by healthcare providers, aggressive marketing by pharmaceutical companies, and the availability of illicit opioids such as fentanyl, among many more. The opioid epidemic has been devastating, with over 500,000 people in the United States dying from opioid overdoses between 1999 and 2019. The epidemic has also had social and economic costs, with increased healthcare costs, lost productivity, and strain on public resources such as law enforcement and the healthcare system. The opioid epidemic has been called the worst public health crisis in American history, and it continues to impact millions of people across the country. Joining us tonight to help gain a new perspective on the opioid crisis is author and journalist Sam Quinones. A graduate of Claremont High School and UC Berkeley, Quinones has spent his 35-year career mostly as a freelance reporter, contributing to the LA Times, the New York Times, National Geographic, and more. He has been recognized for both his journalism and writing with awards such as the 2015 National Book Critics Circle Award for his first book on the opioid epidemic. Quinones tackles the opioid crisis head-on in his 2015 release, Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic, and his 2021 follow-up, The Least of Us, True Tales of America and Hope in the Time of Fentanyl and Meth. He has delved into the history, economics, and social factors that have contributed to the epidemic and offers a compelling account of the people and communities affected by it, and he will share that tonight. Before welcoming our speaker, we ask that cell phones be silenced and put away, and kindly remind the audience that video and audio recordings are strictly prohibited. At the end of tonight's presentation, there will be some time for questions and answers. With that in mind, please welcome to the AF, Sam Quinones.
Abe, is this yours? Oh, that's yours. Okay, fine. All right, fine. Great. How you guys doing? Great. Everybody good? All right, so cool to be back in Claremont. I grew up here. I grew up over south, just south of Oakmont School, which for you students is another world, I'm quite sure. It's right on Arrow Highway and College Avenue. Anyway, I was over there today driving around looking at my old house and neighborhood and where houses, where we lived, where we grew up. My father, as many of you know, or some of you may know, was a comparative literature professor here, one of the more notable cantankerous personalities on this campus, I think. And he died in 2019. We had his memorial right in this room, as a matter of fact. It's great to see old friends. Aaron, let him thank you, man. Lydia, Henry, Terrell Jones, where are you, man? There we go. Terrell and I went to elementary school together. He now teaches here in the journalism. It's journalism, correct? Yeah, great. Wonderful to see you. Thanks to you all for coming out. So tonight, I don't have a PowerPoint. Okay, there we go. See? That's what I'm saying. I was telling somebody else. Normally people applaud when I get it. I'm telling them. No, I just talk, and so you'll just have to get used to it. Anyway, so tonight I spent as Abe said. By the way, I had just 7 actually new best friends here at this table. Nice to meet all of you all. Just be careful of who you'll end up working for. All right, man. We've been through this. We'll get. He can explain later. So my life for the last 10 years, really unexpectedly, has been to write about the opioid epidemic. Addiction, really, now it's just addiction epidemic in America today, which is really kind of a new segment. It's very different from what had gone before in the last 25, say, plus years. This is a very different story than we've had in, say, the previous 50. And I ended up, started into this writing about a book called Dreamland, as Abe said, which was about the pain pill prescribing to heroin. And then the latest one is The Least of Us, is about methamphetamine and fentanyl. But before I tell you that story, I want to tell you a story of a guy I met in LA. As I was finishing up my latest book, The Least of Us, I met a guy by the name of Eric Barrera. Eric is a husky guy, sweet-natured fella, thick neck, former Marine, had been in the Marines in 2000. When I met him, he was by then an outreach worker. He would go into tent encampments looking for vets who might need housing, right? And he would, work them, see if he could find people who would be willing to take housing, even though they were in a tent encampment. Not a lot of people did. He told me that after leaving the Marines in 2000, his career was not what he had hoped it'd be. Excuse me. So he was suffering from a little bit of depression, and he began to use methamphetamine to treat that in a sense, right? It was a euphoric drug back then, he said. It made him feel top of his game. He was everybody's best friend. He couldn't shut him up. He'd be awake for 3 or 4 days and then crash. But he was able to more or less to keep his life together. Had a job, had a girlfriend, had a car, had an apartment, And then when I met Eric, we were at a pizzeria in Pasadena. He told me during that meeting, one day precisely in the year of 2009, the meth changed. All of a sudden, he was this raging, paranoid guy, certain that his wife or his girlfriend had hidden a man in the wall and began stabbing the wall with a butcher knife, and then the match was out of his mind. He said for the next several years till he got sober, the methamphetamine that he used was no longer the euphoric drug. It was absolutely a controlling, paranoid, hallucinatory, delusional drug, and he lived it. Every bus stop when he'd get on the bus, every bus stop was certain to have a Mexican cartel killer just waiting to kill him. This is how he lived. He was transformed by the end of that year into kind of a raging, kind of paranoid guy. All his friends got rid of, nobody really wanted to be around him. And I'll get back to the Eric story. I wanted to tell you that first to set up what I'm going to talk about now, but we'll get back to Eric's story in a minute. While writing Dreamland, backtracking a little bit, while writing Dreamland, this was in 2013 and 14, I was struck. This is what I first remember when I was writing that book. It was that nobody wanted to talk about this. This was like, for some of you who are the age, you can remember, like the early days of the AIDS epidemic, where every obituary of a person who died of AIDS was, leukemia, he had cancer, he had something else, no HIV, ever in that obituary, right? Well, same was true of addiction. People were, he died of a heart attack. He died suddenly at home at 27. Obituaries constantly fabricated causes of death. There were only 3 lawsuits. When I was working on this book, on the first book on this, there were only 3 lawsuits against drug companies. And when I proposed this book in 2012, when my agent was first taking the book around to publishers, in all of New York City, we went to 15 publishers. 1 publishing house wanted a book on this topic. 1. Now you go there and it'd be like line out the door, bidding for these things. We put the book out in 2015, and immediately, I told my wife, this book is going to fail. We're going to be, doing, another book real soon, because no one's going to read it. Because I thought nobody really wanted to talk. The families in particular of addicted loved ones did not want to talk about this. Suddenly come out with a book, and suddenly, within a few months, pretty soon I began to get huge numbers of invitations. Over the next 5 years, they expanded like every year more. It was astounding. We were walking around in a daze in my house. All of a sudden, you see people coming out of the woodwork, people who had lived in the shadows, living alone, terrified of people figuring out how their loved one really died, crying themselves to sleep with their arms around a photo album every night. Now those people felt kind of some freedom, and they began to come out of the shadows onto Facebook, at Kroger's, a lot of us in the Midwest. I began to get invitations to speak. It was a weird thing. But as you're a freelancer, as I've been many times in my life, you have this idea that you never, ever, ever turn down work, right? And so people would offer me to come speak in Kentucky or in Hawaii or in Vermont or in Oklahoma. And so over the 5 years, beginning in September of 2015, until COVID hit, it's embarrassing, but kind of amazing. I did 265 speeches in that time. Just insane when I think about it now. But again, you know, the freelancer in us all says, never turn down work. And so I didn't. I began to travel the country. Vermont, Las Vegas, all over the country. I saw the country. I really didn't see the country. I saw like every Hampton Inn, every airport. What I saw, probably more importantly, was Americans. A beautiful thing, very healthy for a journalist to see this, to feel this. People of all kinds, judges, recovering drug addicts, people who had lost family members, hospital administrators, cops, prosecutors, on and on and on. And finally, my publisher asked for another book. He's pushing me, the editor's pushing me, we got to have another book. And I'm like, I'm exhausted, man. I'm worn out. I don't think I can do it. I knew this was an issue rooted, it's one of the most important issues of our time. It's rooted in our own, I believe, in our own destruction of community. As a country, we have set about destroying what brings us together in very fundamental ways since the last 40 years at least. And community is the bulwark, the defense that we possess. Also, it's rooted, I believe, in our desire for easy answers, magic bullet answers to very, very complicated questions. But I was exhausted, and also I thought my book Dreamland, dealing with pain pills and heroin, I thought that was all there was to say. Right? I mean, I was thinking old school. I'm a crime reporter, longtime crime reporter at heart. And I was thinking like an old school crime reporter, I thought to myself, what could be worse than heroin? And then I began to travel the country, make these speeches and so on, and I began to figure out. I began to see what's worse than heroin. As I watched, as I was traveling, I watched the dawning of the synthetic era of drugs in America, and one that we will not back out of anytime soon. Synthetic era drugs, meaning drugs are fabricated only from chemicals, no plants involved, right? Only chemicals. Now, instead of doctors prescribing pain pills, the drug underworld, particularly from Mexico, was the source. Covering the country with these drugs, particularly fentanyl and methamphetamine, these two drugs. Using, however, the market of addicted Americans that the opioid epidemic had created as their kind of trampoline, what I wrote about in Dreamland. Synthetic drugs are all about what benefits traffickers and dealers. There is no benefit to a user. If you are making synthetic drugs, you don't need land, sunlight, irrigation. You don't need, you contract the supply chain down to a few people. Right? You make it all in a lab, away from the prying eyes of a helicopter. Now you don't need land. What you need is shipping ports. Because shipping ports is where you get access to the world's chemical markets, and that is what we're seeing down in Mexico. Colossal, I'd say catastrophic quantities of ingredients coming through, particularly the western side of Mexico, two major ports, Manzanillo and Michoacan, with all kinds of these chemicals being made then in those areas and being funneled up here. All of this, they're produced year-round. There's no seasons anymore as there is with plants. It just transforms everything. There's nothing that remains the same. This is about supply creating demand, not the other way around, in my opinion. As I was writing The Least of Us, I studied neuroscience and consumer marketing. Fast food companies place their products aggressively wherever they can. What they're looking for is no friction to use, or reduced friction to use. Soda companies fight for space in grocery stores for just that reason. Netflix dovetails one program right into the next, doesn't give us a chance to say, I don't think I want to watch the next episode, right? Seemed that synthetic drugs made by traffickers down in Mexico were kind of after that same idea, reduced friction to supply. Supply was unrelenting. It was everywhere in this country, all across this country. They discovered fentanyl in 2006. Amateur chemists kind of clued them into the Sinaloa drug cartel into fentanyl. Before that, they did not know such a thing existed. They called it synthetic heroin at first, and then it became, they understood what it was. But as the opioid epidemic expanded in this country, they were providing heroin too. They lost that chemist, he was busted, but they never quite forgot fentanyl. And by 2013, 14, Chinese companies were importing it into the United States to small-time dealers by the pound at a time. But really what was happening was the Mexican trafficking world was learning. They have an enormous capacity for supply production down in Mexico. And if you can get all the ingredients, and pretty soon, within a few years, they were the main source. No longer is China the main source of our fentanyl. It's the main source of the ingredients that are used to make fentanyl down in Mexico. That's a transformation that began about 2015-16 and now is fully complete. And now you see, particularly when it comes to fentanyl, catastrophic quantities of this drug. Now we're seeing it in counterfeit pills that look like Xanax bars or Percocets or a number of drugs, Adderall or what have you. All of this is supply driven. A new way of packaging the drug fentanyl that they are making in such huge quantities by so many people, particularly on the western side of Mexico, which is kind of the home base of the drug culture and trafficking culture in Mexico. This changes everything. These two drugs change everything. I'll talk about meth in a minute, but meth and fentanyl together change everything that we thought we knew about drug production, smuggling, profit, use, addiction, overdose, treatment, on and on and on. There is nothing that remains the same when faced with massive quantities of highly potent, very cheap, relentless methamphetamine and fentanyl. There's, as many drug counselors will tell you, there's no such thing as a long-term fentanyl user. They all die. Unless they get into treatment, they all die. Fentanyl you should know, I've had fentanyl. It's actually, like any opioid, it's a magnificent drug when used the proper way. I had a heart attack in 2017. Fentanyl has been used for cardiac surgery for decades, since it was invented in 1960. It's a wonderful drug because it takes you in and out of anesthesia very quickly. It's very easy to control. Paramedics use it all the time. Doctors, anesthesiologists use it all the time, and since the 1960s. It's magnificent in surgery. It is an absolute catastrophe in the hands of drug traffickers. And one of the reasons is because of that very nature, what makes it such a great drug surgically. Because every user now must use over and over all day long. Somebody who'd use heroin twice a day, maybe 3 times a day if you had a lot of money, now has to use fentanyl 6, 7 times because you are always being taken out. You're always being approached by the withdrawals. They're never leaving you in peace because it's always like this quick in and out. Traffickers learn the benefits, though, of synthetics not from fentanyl. They learned it from methamphetamine down in Mexico. In the 1990s, they industrialized fentanyl. They made it into a drug using a chemical called ephedrine, which is in Sudafed pills, decongestant, basically. And, again, it was this kind of a euphoric drug made that way. They industrialized, but they never had enough ephedrine to make enough meth to cover more than parts of the western United States, never east of the Mississippi River. That's why you got all those little mini labs, right? They made all these movies about them and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's because in the Mexican trafficking world, never had the access to ephedrine to cover the entire United States. And that lasted for about 18 years through the 80s until 2008, when the Mexican government put a big restriction on how much ephedrine they were allowed to come into the country. And by 2009, that crucial year, when Eric Barrera told me all things change with meth, they had to switch to a new form of making methamphetamine and meth, a precursor known as P2P, phenyl-2-propanone is the name, just call it P2P. For short, P2P is a messy way of making methamphetamine, but it has one benefit, and that is that you can make P2P many, many different ways with all kinds of different chemicals. And if the government catches on this assortment of chemicals to make meth, You can switch to this one, and then to this, and then to this, and that's what they've been doing. And if you have access to the ingredients coming in from China, you can make this stuff all year round in quantities that boggle the mind. And that has been the story in the United States since about 2009. The learning curve began in 2009, and still people were figuring it out 2010, 11, but by 2012 and 13, you began to see supplies just eclipse anything we've ever seen. Amazingly, if you go down to Skid Row in LA, which was a crack den for decades, now it's methamphetamine is king. Methamphetamine began to travel, kind of march across the country, beginning about 2012, 13, all hit the Midwest by 2017, across the Mississippi River. All those little meth cooks, they're no more. They don't exist. It's like what Walmart did to Main Street. That's what these drugs do to the small-time meth cook. There was subject to so many movies and songs. It covers the country, and now so what you have is meth in Vermont. You have meth in Kentucky, you have meth all over North Carolina, all of it dirt cheap. In Nashville, where I live now, a pound of meth went wholesale in 2016 for $16,000. Now it's down to $2,000. In Fresno, a guy I know who's been working narcotics since 2008, told me he bought meth wholesale undercover for $20,000 a pound in 2008. Now it's down to $800. It just shows you the price is a reflection of the utter capacity to produce quantities of methamphetamine that we have never seen in this country ever before. But I thought that was a story. When I was writing my book, I thought that was a story. That's a huge story. Production capacity through the roof. Oh my God, this is really big. And then along the way, I met Eric Barrera. And he told me of another twist to that story. And that is, he told me that it was creating in him massive symptoms of schizophrenia, symptoms of paranoia, delusions, hallucinations constantly, never left him for the time he was using it. And I thought to myself, oh my God, he had this in 2009, which is the very year this began to change. If this meth is everywhere, maybe these symptoms are everywhere too. So I was about to turn in my book, and I told my editor, whoa, time out, give me 3 more months. And this was in the summer of COVID. And I began to call around, couldn't travel, called around all different places. Albuquerque, Vermont, Virginia, rural Indiana, Portland, Vegas, on and on, Skid Row. And each place I called, I was finding the same story, which was that methamphetamine was not only everywhere and cheaper than ever and more potent than ever, it was also creating symptoms of rapid onset symptoms of mental illness, schizophrenia, paranoia, delusions. There was no longer like the euphoria of the ephedrine meth. It was a sinister thing. It was not about being around other people, which was the ephedrine meth. It was about turning inward, being alone, with your weird thoughts and the strange world that meth created in your brain. This was not being written about anywhere, but it was clearly graphically apparent on the street, particularly in tent encampments, everywhere you go. That's what is on display. One addiction clinic director in West Virginia told me it's a matter of hours before people start displaying these symptoms once they use methamphetamine. It burned away empathy. I had this remarkable conversation with this woman who, on this meth, had been barking like a dog. She just went out of her mind. Well, she got sober. But for 6 months in her sobriety, she could feel nothing for another human being. And it wasn't, she said, until this strange moment. She was in a sober living house with a roommate, and they were watching this cheesy kind of rom-com with J-Lo, what's her name? Jennifer Lopez, right? Made in Manhattan. You guys ever seen that movie? I have not bothered, but I know what her movies are like. Anyway, and she told me, I watched this movie, and midway through the movie, I began to sob. But it was tears of happiness, because for the first time, I actually felt something for the character, for a human being. It was been 6 months, I'd been sober 6 months, I still didn't feel anything. By the time I talked to her, she was 2 years sober and kind of on a better path. I began to realize that the spreading mental illness and addiction was part of the larger story of how homelessness spread in this country too in the last 10 years. P2P meth coming out of Mexico, creating massive symptoms of, and huge supplies, massive symptoms of paranoia, of inability to live with other people. All across, there are 3 chapters in my book about the town of Clarksburg, West Virginia, town that had no homeless people until this mess showed up, and within a year, hundreds of people are wandering around dazed, out of their minds, stripping the copper wire from houses, and so on. Up to now, homelessness has been really discussed as exclusively due to the lack of affordable housing. There's something to that, but I think that kind of dogmatic approach to homelessness really ignores the massive driving force that nationwide P2P supplies, P2P meth supplies, have in causing, not only in causing people's homelessness, but then in keeping people homeless once they are homeless for whatever reason. And homelessness is an enormously complex thing. It's as complex as every human being who is homeless. But what is true is it's so plentiful, so cheap, so prevalent that once you start using it, it's very difficult to get out of it. And hence, that's what we see in tent encampments. It was striking to me how much was changed by synthetic drugs. You know, historians, if you read the history of drug use in America, historians will talk about cycles. So societally, we go through, you know, stimulants, and then depressants, and then back to stimulants. Every cycle takes like 10, 15 years. There's no more cycles. There's no more cycles. It's all stimulant and depressant coming together in enormous quantities. And there is no more cycles. It's all just the same stuff. They're being trafficked together by the same people, trafficked together by the same people, and then used and sometimes killing people together. It's a remarkable, once you begin to chart how much of synthetic drugs change, it's a remarkable thing you begin to check off a long list of things. You know, the era of recreational drug use, basically over. Fentanyl has ended that. There is no such thing anymore as recreational, risk-free recreational drug use in America, which was the case when I was growing up. Now fentanyl will kill you. It's in the cocaine. It's in who knows what. You don't know what's in that pill that somebody gave you at a party. It's at the end of certain basic ideas, such as we need to be ready for treatment. On the street, there's no such thing as readiness for treatment when you are being attacked, bedeviled by methamphetamine and fentanyl. Rock bottom, the idea that you need to wait for someone to hit rock bottom. Now, today with fentanyl, rock bottom is death. You can't really expect people to live on the street anymore like this. Right now, the idea is keep reviving people, unprecedented use of the drug known as naloxone, Narcan, which is an antidote to an opioid overdose, which is a good thing. It's absolutely important to keep people alive. But repeated overdoses on the street is like a football player not worrying about the concussion he just had and running right back in. Eventually, you are going to have brain damage that will keep people from actually making that decision to stop using. It affects the brain, it affects the memory, it affects the prefrontal cortex that governs consequences and just long-term planning. All of this is affected by overdose, and now you're finding people on the street who've overdosed 10, 15, 20, 30 times. It's a historic moment in America. We've never seen any society in the world has ever had so many people overdose to an opioid, and no society in the world has ever had so many people be revived, which is a good thing, except for that if your policy is to say, well, now you're done, you're fine, on your way. Truth is, people get brain impairment very quickly through all of that. Again, so much is changed by the world that is created by synthetic drugs. I began to study, too, fascinating stuff to study the neuroscience of addiction. We live in a golden era of neuroscience research, and for laymen like me, it is just fascinating. I just love talking with certain neuroscientists, understanding what's, I wish we had studied that when I studied economics at UC Berkeley in the 1970s. There's clearly an important role in economic research is what happens to the brain, how the brain makes decisions. It's fascinating stuff. One of the things I learned is that we can all, every single one of us, can be addicted to something. We all have the brain chemistry, the reward pathways and so on that allow us to be addicted to something. Another is that our brains have mechanisms evolved. This is amazing to me. I remember how it blew me away when I realized I was finally I'm slow on the uptake sometimes, but we have things in our brain that allow us to keep us alive. They give us good feelings when we do stuff that allow us to prosper, like when we eat, when we have sex, when we are with other people. All of this is kind of like good. Oh yeah, and brains tell us this, right? The other thing is it warns us of imminent threats, not to question, just run, just go. The remarkable thing about drugs of abuse is that it thwarts all of that, squelches, mutes, all of that, and diverts those powerful, powerful impulses away from what helps us survive and towards finding dope at no matter the risk to our own well-being. And this is the very definition of addiction. Our systems that help keep us alive betray us in a sense and aid in our demise. But that's what dope does to our brains. It convinces us that we can only function with it. And that dope equals life, even as it kills us. The more potent and prevalent the dope, just like alcohol, it's not just drugs of abuse. It's all drugs of abuse, including alcohol. But the more potent and prevalent the dope supply, the more chance it has to do that. And methamphetamine are the drugs that are now doing this nationwide to people all across. And you see this again many times in encampments. I talked with Eric Barrera, and he was telling me, once I got addicted to this stuff, all his life just unraveled on P2P meth. Consumed his whole life. He was living in his car. His girlfriend threw him out. His mom threw him out. All his friends didn't want to. It was just him, his dope, and his pornography. I believe now that tent encampments, many of them anyway, are symptoms of how bad the meth and fentanyl problem is in this country. It's showing that people in those encampments, like a lot of people Eric went to visit, would turn away from help, turn away from housing, turn away from treatment, turn away from a good warm meal, because I believe they are now dominated by the drugs of abuse have simply dominated the reward pathways in their brain. There is simply no instinct for self-preservation displayed in those encampments. It's hijacked and redirected towards finding more dope, no matter the risk. Neuroscience also shows us that we can all be addicted. We can all be that addict eating from the trash. Very important lesson, I think. We can all be rendered powerless before a substance. I smoked 13 years. Quit 9 times before I quit, right? Another thing that they're finding is that we can all be primed for addiction. I think in our lifetimes, those of us who are my age or older, we have seen this absolutely take place, an utter transformation of what we are bombarded with daily. Unbelievable bombardment of products that are legal and highly addictive, right? You see it on sports, you see gambling now apps, right? You see it, you see those ads for burgers and pizzas. It's like they're like oozing. They take it right they learn that from the pornography industry. You take big close-ups, it's like the burgers just had sex, right? Oh, I gotta have one of those. It's oozing, gooey, oh man, let me go get one of those, my God. Continually refined. There's these, the investment is so powerful into things that are continually being refined to hit our reward pathways and addict us to stuff that's legal, let alone the stuff that's illegal. Sugar, chicken nuggets, fast food, nicotine, alcohol, video games, pornography, gambling, casinos, social media. All of this is stripped of any nutrition, either intellectual or actual physical nutrition that might slow its absorption into our brains, right? Chicken nuggets? Chicken nuggets are just like crack cocaine. Okay? Think about what a chicken nugget is. You take a chicken that's actually fairly nutritious and you strip it about, you transform it, the byproducts, into what's known as chicken clay. Oh, yum. Yeah, give me, don't call them nuggets. Can I get some of your chicken clay? Yeah, that's 60% fat and salt in that crap. You add dips, what do you got? The trifecta of things that drive our reward pathways crazy. Sugar, fat, salt. So it becomes streamlined doses that wallop the brain, keep us eating more, particularly when it's, again, dipped in sugar. I mean, think of what happens, what is crack? Crack comes from a coca leaf. You eat a coca leaf, you get a mild buzz. You process the coca leaves into cocaine, all of a sudden you are zinged. It's hitting your brain real quick. Then you bake it with water and baking soda, and it turns into crack, and it's like a superliner drinking right to your brain, just like a chicken nugget. You know, it seems to me so many legal products are fine-tuned to just keep us using, keep us watching. The Sinaloa drug cartel then takes its place on a panorama, like a long litany of things. It starts with, you know, Facebook software engineers, casino designers, video game manufacturers, TikTok, CNN and Fox News, Instagram, fast food, soda, and on the outskirts there's the Sinaloa drug cartel, but they all have the same idea, which is to keep us using. Keep prodding your little brain pathways. Ultra-processed foods are the worst. High fructose corn syrup. What does not have high fructose corn syrup in it? Just like fentanyl. You put fentanyl and meth, you put in cocaine, you put high fructose corn syrup and ketchup and whatever damn thing. I realize that we live in a time, as I was writing this book, you know, we live at a time when traffickers behave like corporations. Corporations behave like traffickers. So the question I faced was, what can I say about what we should do? I'm a journalist, right? But I'm no different than a lot of you. I'm interested in the world my daughter's going to grow up in. She's 16. But how do we defend ourselves against these powerful economic forces, legal and illegal? It occurred to me, as I was writing this, that maybe there wasn't much to say except for that perhaps our best defense, maybe our only defense, is in repairing and rebuilding and strengthening community. Community is the most powerful, more powerful than any drug, because we evolved to need it. We survived. As we live today as human beings all across this earth because we understood the importance of being around others, of working with. It's messy. It's disagreeable. We don't like other people sometimes. They don't vote like we do. But the truth is, we need it, and we have always needed it. Remember the caveman who decides, I'm going to go march to the beat of my own drummer. That dude got eaten. He's dead. He didn't live. He got weeded out, you know. We come from a whole line of people, a line of ancestors who understand the power of community, and we have done so much in this country to decide that we don't really need it, or to shred it, destroy it. But you know, community is why we worship together, why we eat together, why we play music together, sports. I mean, I'm happy to say as a journalist, that's why we will always, always need storytelling. Hieroglyphics, caveman drawings, Breaking Bad, it's the same thing. We're telling stories. Homer, the Odyssey. I mean, we only, as I said, today we just figured out, well, we're too prosperous. We don't need other people. We just sit in our own rooms, and then we're not around these people that drive us nuts. It's messy. It's cost too much in taxes. Don't really like them. You know, so you get Walmart replacing Main Street. Youth sports that once brought people together are now club sports. And so the only people who go to see these games are the families because they're 100 miles away. Community banks that were so important to local economic development have been swallowed up. Many towns don't even have their own bank. I believe that there are many lessons from this opioid addiction epidemic that are so important for us to keep in mind. And one of them is it's calling on us as individuals, take control and accountability for our own wellness. Particularly after I had my heart attack, I began to realize this was so important. Re-examine how we live, how much exercise, what we consume. When we go into the store, ask ourselves, what are we buying? How many ingredients? More ingredients, the more toxic it is. Right? Re-examine what we watch, where we get our news, for God's sakes. You know, we have to work for an opinion. You have to talk to people who knew more than you, God forbid. You know, who maybe thought differently. And then you develop an opinion. Now those opinions are just like crack, just like chicken nuggets. They are force-fed to us, easy. We don't have to work for any of that. Oh, I'll take that meme. That's my opinion now. Right? Twitter, it's my opinion generator. No hard work. I think the epidemic's calling on us to understand that we are only as strong as the most vulnerable. We are only as strong as the least of us, which is why I titled my book that way. It's calling on us, I believe, to return to what allowed us to survive for millennia as a species. Don't believe we can go it alone. Care for each other. Spend time with each other. This is what cavemen knew to be true, and we just decided in our arrogance in America, 21st century, that it wasn't really all that necessary. I mean, it's telling us to get out of our houses and be with other Americans. I traveled down this afternoon, St. Bonaventure Street, where I grew up, south of Oakmont School. Now, this is a school, a place where we were growing up. Every afternoon, there were kids outside. You'd stand at the top of the street, look down the street, there'd be clumps of mostly boys out. There weren't very many girls on our street for some reason. You go over to Blaisdell Park, packed. I've been by that same street since I moved. I've lived 10 years in Mexico. Since I moved back from Mexico, maybe 10, 15 times. Every time I come to Claremont, I drive down it, and never, not once have I ever, one time did I see a person on St. Bonaventure Street. They thought I was a child molester. They called somebody, and one guy starts following me. Because if I'm traveling slow down a street, the only reason I could be there was to abduct and molest their children, right? They didn't understand, but anyway. I think that this is all teaching us important things. And I think, when I was writing it, I'm not a Christian. But while I was writing this book, I knew that I needed a guide because my editor had been pushing me to write this book and said, just write. Don't write a book outline. Don't write a book proposal. Just write it. And I was like, that's a bad idea. But I went, and so it was like grappling, trying to figure out what the book was actually about. So I needed a guide, so I began to read the Bible. I read the Gospels, and in Matthew in particular. And what Jesus said to his disciples hit me very powerfully. That which you do for the least of these, my brethren, do for me, Jesus. Jesus understood the power of community, right? That it could not function while we turned our backs on those around us. So as I was doing this, I decided I need to find stories. I'm a journalist. I'm not a preacher here. I need to find stories of the Americans involved in the smallest, least noticed, least sexy stories of people, Americans involved in community repair that I could find. So one of them is about a flat-top sheriff in a rural county in Ohio, fox watching, tobacco chewing, guy, wonderful man, Keith Everhart, deciding that he had to lead in helping addicts in recovery find jobs, something he did not understand when he was simply a deputy before he was elected. So he hires the town's most notorious heroin addict, guy who'd been in and out of his jail many a time, who was then on his 9th try to stay sober, in drug court, made him the department janitor, and in time that guy became the dispatcher, dispatching loose dog on the highway, whatever it was. What I loved about the stories I began to write, because whenever I'm on like radio interviews, which happens a lot, we spend most of the time on fentanyl and meth. And the subtitle of the book is True Tales of American Hope in the Time of Fentanyl and Meth. And so usually the guy goes, with 3 minutes to go, he goes, Sam, where's the hope? Like that, And I go, dude, this is 3 minutes. You're not going to get me to talk about the half of the book in 3 minutes. You have to have me back on, okay? But to me, these stories were pivotal, especially because they were about Americans changing their minds. Like it's a radical, we do this all the time in our daily life, but think about it on TV. When do you ever see some guy on Fox News or CNN go, you know what, Joan, your piercing logic and trenchant wit have convinced me to rethink my entire opinion on this topic. Never happens, you know? The stories that I wrote about people who were doing this in small ways, because I did not want to write about people who are looking for the magic bullet answer to their problems. It was that daily stuff. The least of it, the least effort is where we need to focus. Locally, showing up daily, moving towards a solution in the long run. That's where we get social change is most important, and with the least amount of unintended consequences, I think. Happens in small steps. It's unheralded. It's what addicts in recovery do every single day. They show us by their example how to move forward. No epiphanies. No magic bullet, just like moving slowly. It's getting used to those small steps, which we are not used to. We've gotten away from. That's the trick. But haven't we had enough of like magic bullet, sexy, big answers to all our problems, you know? So anyway, I rushed around filling the book with these kinds of stories, gathering them up, believing that, you know, maybe the medium is the message. Maybe if I tell enough stories of people doing small stuff, just showing up, small things. I loved it because no one was giving me press releases for these stories. I had to find them myself, and I take an enormous amount of journalistic pride in being able to do that. Maybe that is what they are showing us. Maybe that is how we defend ourselves in a world where corporations behave like drug traffickers, and drug traffickers behave like corporations. Right? You know, synthetic dope is real, but a more powerful thing than all of that is what we believe is possible for us as a town, as a street, as a community, as a house of worship. These stories reminded me that we evolved to work together collectively in groups for the betterment of all. That's how we evolved. That's how we survived. And we have fallen so far away from that as a society, it seems to me. And so, therefore, widespread loneliness, friendlessness, suicide, depression, inquisitorial political extremes, reaching more and more crazy solutions like locusts. We've stopped believing in what we can do, what we can affect in our lives and in our communities. But to me, I have to tell you, that is the dope talking. That's Fox News and CNN talking right there. What's their message? That outrage they constantly blast out at us? Their message is, you're right, they're bad. Not they're wrong, they're bad. They are failed human beings. I believe that we can counter this with a deepening understanding of the preciousness of us. Not just an individual's life, but the beauty of all of us living on the planet together. Why should we feel hopeful? The hope in my subtitle? Well, this is the reason. Our ultimate defense, our best defense, is in us waking up to what we have within all of us together. Waking up to the preciousness of us. Working in small steps, like that addict in recovery. Not expecting miracles, just daily work. Once you get down to the local level, I have found in my reporting, which is where I've done most of my reporting, you burn away all the crud on Twitter and Facebook and Fox News and CNN, and you get down to basic human relations that are beautiful and messy, but that we evolve to require, seems to me. Finally, I'd like to tell you the ending to the story of Eric Barrera, because I love it so much. Eric, several years using meth, driving him out of his mind, losing everything. Eric finally got sober. But he still had issues with depression. And one day, his girlfriend, driving in Van Nuys, finds a stray gray pit bull wandering in LA traffic and somehow opens the door and lets this pit bull. I would not let a stray pit bull into my car, but she was gutsier than me, and so she did. Well, what they found was this pooch got along with everybody. This family actually happens to raise Chihuahuas, And the dog didn't eat the chihuahuas, which was good of him. They were going to give him up for adoption when Eric said, you know what, maybe I'll use him, maybe I can get him trained as a service dog. So he put some money down and trained the dog as a service dog. He named the dog Mundo, for world, right? Spanish for world. And now he took Mundo with him through the homeless encampments in his job for the VA, looking for vets in the tent encampments. Amazingly, the pooch moved him out of his depression. Made him take him running every day. And you know, depression, medicine is motion. Motion is medicine, rather. And soon, Eric's depression was lifting. No pills, no high-tech solution, just going running with the dog. He began to take classes at a community college, found it easier to be around other people. He could focus more. All the girls wanted to pet Mundo. Leaving meth, Eric found Mundo. He found the world, community, through this pooch. Again, a low-tech, simple solution without pills. He found the opposite of what P2P meth had mired him in. Mundo pulled him away from all that. It's interesting because if you look at him, Mundo has a thick neck, a flat top, good-natured and sweet. He just looks just like Eric. Each was lost and alone in a menacing world, and now they are each other's constant companion. Anyway, after a decade or more of interviews, research, and writing, that's what this national saga has left me with. That the lessons of neuroscience, the opioid epidemic, our new era of synthetic, nasty, toxic crap, the pandemic even, the spread of methamphetamine, the lessons of all of this are really all the same, and we would be wise to heed them, and those are that we are strongest in community, as weak as our most vulnerable, and the least of us lie within us all. Thank you all very much for taking some time to listen to me. Thank you. And now, if you have questions or critiques,
thank you to Sam
or
for that
fawning praise,
impassioned speech. If you would like to ask a question, you're more than welcome to come up to this mic. We ask that you introduce yourself with your name, class year, and try to limit to one question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Simran. I'm a junior studying economics at CMC, and thank you for your talk. My question is about community, since you mentioned throughout your talk that community is like a good solution to this whole addiction epidemic. So I'm wondering if you think there are any particular forms of community that would be most effective for combating the addiction epidemic and then preventing it for future generations?
You know, that's a really good question, and my feeling is this, getting back to what I was talking about a minute ago about empty streets. My feeling is that we could kind of probably devise a lot of very complicated solutions to this, but I think what it really gets down to is actually a lot of low-tech stuff, like being outside with other Americans, I mean, I really think that that's part of what happens, not expecting big answers. The last chapter in my book I write about this town, Portsmouth, Ohio. There was kind of a Rust Belt town. There was really the central town in my first book, Dreamland. And what they're doing there is a guy opened an open air cafe. People now get together, they plan businesses, they have fun, they plan all kinds of things at that open air cafe. They have 4 CrossFits. This is the county that leads Ohio in obesity, right? You kind of get this community feel. I would tell you this, I really believe in the simple solutions. On our street, when I was writing Dreamland, I could see that what I was writing about was apparent on my street. And I had a daughter who was 7 at the time. And I'm like, that's not good. I'm not gonna let my daughter grow up. So we planned this thing, and we planned this thing called, around Halloween, called Street of Heads. Street of Heads, okay? What Street of Heads is, you bring all the kids in the neighborhood. At that time, she was in elementary school, so all the kids, friends from the elementary school came, and their parents, And it's like 60 kids, something like that, 60, something like that. And we buy styrofoam wig heads, and everybody, all the kids paint them and stick arrows through them and glue eyeballs all over them. And you go to the 99-cent store, you buy all kinds of crap, and you just put them all. And it was a remarkable thing. We're now on that street. I no longer do it, but on that street, we're now on the 8th annual Street of Heads. And what you see on that street is that people are far more organized. They know each other. They've all come, they come outside and talk with one another. We never did that before. It's like simple stuff. They know to say, can you feed my cat? Can you do this? Can you watch my house? Whatever. I sometimes think that sometimes this stuff feels too big, and we have to really reduce it down to the most simple, basic, local idea. People in churches frequently ask me, well, what can churches do? Well, that's a great question. I would say that churches, instead of trying to solve, say, the foster children problem in your county, which could be huge, how about one church take one family? Try to figure out how to help that one family. I mean, that's what used to happen. Churches used to do that, and now I guess some of them have gotten away from it. So my feeling is not to get so wrapped up in like big, complicated solutions, and see how working in small ways can then lead to the synergies, social synergies, economic synergies perhaps, whatever, that make other solutions possible that were not when you were all like this instead of like that. That's my best shot, okay? I mean, I'm a journalist here, and I'm trying to figure this out just like every other American, but that's my feeling on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes?
Thank you so much for your talk. My name is Nicola. I'm a psychology philosophy major at CMC.
Here at CMC?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And I really agree with you. I think community is the best way to go when solving like many of our crises, but it is also idealist in a way because I feel like our generation in particular and the future generations are raised off of this convenience where everything is like really easily handed to us with technology. Like we're academics are entering an era with like ChatGPT or whatever it is. Like we easily solve this, any of our problems basically. So I'm wondering how we would be able to unlearn the convenience that we grew up with, like taking the small steps, but also like.
One of the things I do believe that I learned for myself personally is that there is an individual lesson for each of us in this addiction problem. And that is, we all need, as I said a little bit, we all need to take accountability for our own wellness. And that means making choices every day to buy certain things and not buy other things. Consume some things and not other things, And it does require you to not be on autopilot, I've found, during consuming decisions. Literally, I think you need to kind of go, the more ingredients on something you buy, the worse it is for you, okay? And I after I had my heart attack, well, actually before that, I stopped. I basically don't drink soda anymore, I'm not fanatical about it. I don't particularly like fanatics. I don't particularly like self-righteousness and so on. But I also know that, I eat In-N-Out every few months, and that's it, because In-N-Out's the best burger ever. But that's not every day, okay? I haven't had an In-N-Out burger for a while. But I definitely don't go to any other fast food place, and I don't eat a lot of the stuff that you find in 7-Elevens and stuff like that. I get more exercise than I ever did before, as an adult anyway. I get, it's these choices. You build them in. And I think it's now incumbent upon us to make these decisions consciously, because so much of it is like right in our face, right? We used to, when I was growing up, my folks had one car. There was 4 boys, 2 parents, And I wasn't driving anywhere, man. I was riding my clunker bicycle 2 miles uphill to Claremont High every day, you know? Now it's like chauffeured around, all that kind of stuff. And I think we need to make these decisions, work that into your daily habits, because you can do that. That's part of how our brains work. You can do that. I mean, people ask me these enormous societal questions, and I get very scared that I'm going to screw it up. You know what I mean? But I really do believe that it's all about you can narrow that down to you, your family, people you know, et cetera, and that's it, you know. And so we don't have cable TV. Why would we pay $75 a month to watch idiots scream at one another? Not going to go for that, you know. So all of these are decisions that are part of how we navigate this world that we now live in, that you probably have never known any other way. Well, the rest of us who are older, I remember when this was not the case. You know what I mean? So,
Right,
anyway.
I completely agree. My only worry is that wouldn't that alienate you from like the community that does indulge or like in those kind of conveniences or work on autopilot? Because going against the grain is kind of hard in a society where like.
It's not that hard.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that hard. I mean, you build it in. You don't subscribe to this. You subscribe to that. You don't go into the middle of the grocery store. That's very easy not to do. I mean, to me, and you know, I swim a lot. I walk a lot. You know, and so it's like these decisions that ride your bike. You know, that kind of thing. It's these decisions that we now we're you know, good and all. Now they're kind of like essential to make. It seems to me. Anyway.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Mariana. I'm a junior at Pomona, and I'm a cognitive science and media studies double major.
You're a cognitive
Science, which is kind of like neuroscience.
Yes, I know. Yes, it sounds
Yeah.
very, very interesting. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're Pomona?
Yeah.
Okay. I washed dishes there once. For
Oh, cool.
Gibson Hall for like 2 years.
Awesome.
And Pittsburgh too. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I thought your talk was really interesting, and it resonated a lot with like what I've noticed personally, but also like what I've learned about in my classes with cognitive science. And I can tell that you have a lot of experience and like a deep understanding of neuroscience. So I guess I was wondering, when you write about, sorry, I don't know if this is easier to hear now.
I listened to way too much punk rock in Claremont when I was a kid, and so my hearing's shot.
Okay, let me know if is this better?
Oh, yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So I guess I was wondering, how do you balance this like understanding you have of like the human mind and just like neuroscience with writing for a general audience, which is what you do in journalism?
Well, luckily, in my view, writing about neuroscience could not be more interesting. And that's what I took on myself. I wanted to write about these enormously complex things, which I, as a layman, you know, was struggling hard to understand. And what it means is, as with all journalism, it's all of it is about immersion. You've got to talk to people forever, okay? And ask stupid questions. And questions on the third time when you're still not getting it, you know what I mean? But eventually you have to do that, and that's journalism in general. It's finding, journalism is not, in my opinion, not about writing what you know. It's writing what you don't know, and you're going to find out all about it. That's the beauty of the whole career, man. You know, I love it because I get to walk in and tell some brilliant neuroscientist, I'm a journalist, you got to answer all my questions. Well, you don't have to, but you know what I mean. And she'll do it. And she'll be, oh, yeah, great. Nicole Avina in my book, she's brilliant, was part of the team that first kind of set the data for the addictive properties of sugar. Really fascinating woman, really, gosh. Anyway, I was like lucky to speak with her. But immersion, and then true immersion, the reason immersion is important, that means repeated interviews. 1 hour interview is not going to cut it, right? When you're trying to do a book kind of form and tell the story like, what you need is you need to spend lots of time and then write and then go back at it and ask more questions and then write again, you know. And then, but always this is where academia, I think, really, really fails. Academics know so much, and they don't tell those stories very, very well at all. And my feeling is there's two parts to communicating. It's knowing and then telling or narrating or whatever. And you need to know that. And so whenever I was there, first of all, when I was writing about that stuff, I was always looking as a neuroscientist. I don't write about neuroscience. I write about the people who find neuroscience fascinating and who spend their entire lives doing, like Nicole Lavina and several others that are in the book, but she's one of the main ones, you know? When you're writing about human beings, then you, as a human being, can, kind of feel that. You know, for 2 years, she went every night at 10 o'clock to feed the rats sugar, you know, in her lab from her house, you know, every night. That kind of detail, those kinds of details are really important. And so I spend a lot of time talking with people about what they do, but then about also who they are in some way. What motivates them? You know, fascinating thing about neuroscience, really interesting, is that I haven't done a lengthy study on this, but it's true so far as I know, is that most neuroscientists come from families where nobody's gone to college. They're the first ones, and certainly where nobody has studied science of any kind. Right? One of the leading neuroscientists, I'm in Nashville now, at Vanderbilt, is Aaron Calipari. Do you guys follow the NCAAs? John Calipari is the basketball coach of the Kentucky Wildcats. His daughter is this outstanding neuroscientist who her father does not understand in the least, right? But that's the thing. Why? Because neuroscience is a new discipline. The last 20 years is really since it's been really exploding. And so all these people have come who kind of it's not governed by hierarchies and rules and customs. It's a brand new thing. And so all these people, I have not yet met a neuroscientist who wasn't either the first in his or her family go to college, or certainly the first to study science. And so that kind of thing, you know, when you find people who are embarking on this thing that is, you know, radically different for that family, those are the kinds of details that I think really bring people to the story. And then, once you've told them a story about somebody, you could tell them pretty much anything about what that person does. Okay? So, for me, that is really the gorgeous, beautiful part of journalism. It's so fun. I mean, I can't imagine doing anything more fun in my ever. You know, I just get high thinking about it. I wake up every morning going, damn, let's talk about rats and sugar and today, you know, that kind of thing. Really, it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. And that's the problem with journalism today. On CNN and Fox News, you see guys who just, all they've ever talked about is politics, and they never change their mind about it. I think this is the most boring. They're not journalists, okay? There's not a single soul on those networks that is a journalist, in my opinion. Okay, but that's a whole other story. Anyway.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Yes.
Hi, thank you. I'm Selena. I'm a psychology and philosophy major at CMC and a senior.
At CMC?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great.
And a senior as well. I really like that you look to hope. I think that's really important in terms of like combating social injustices or pressures that we face under this capitalist society. You mentioned like corporations function as drug traffickers and vice versa. And I think like it gives hope to the individual, like what we can do, like small is good, small is all. But in your research and reporting, you talk about the prices of drugs just over a decade ago being thousands and now hundreds, like on the horizon. What, if you know, like, do you see an end, and like not an end to drug use? I feel like that's a feature of humanity, right? And it's not really something that could be undone, but in terms of like,
do I feel an end to?
Like what the trend might look like in another decade.
I'm sorry, what does a what look like?
The trend of like drug usage or prices or this epidemic.
Yeah, right. Well, I would say that to me, it looks very much like if you were a drug dealer or a drug trafficker, why would you ever grow another poppy? You know, there's no point to it. What's more, but there's a positive to that I'll get to in a minute. What's more, there is a vast literature, chemistry literature out there of drugs that have been invented and then discarded by drug companies in their attempt to find a commercially viable drug. And there's many. And if you know how to wade through all that, and the drug traffickers are employing chemists who know how to wade through all that, you can find other drugs. So pretty soon there's new drugs called the nitazene drugs. Isotonitazene, etotonitazene, on and on and on. There's about 8 of them developed by the SIBA Corporation in the 1950s. Never could find a way of making them commercially viable, so they've sat there until somebody figured them out in 2019, and now you're seeing these drugs somewhere else. The truth is that once traffickers figure out the benefits of synthetic drugs, why would they do anything else? It seems to make total business sense. That's what I said earlier. However, this is not a bad thing, because what it really does is it pushes us to understand the severity of drug use now. You cannot mess around with this stuff anymore. Now, when I was in high school at El Roble Junior High and Claremont High, marijuana was like the mildest thing. Okay, fine. Now, marijuana can have fentanyl in it, but whatever it has, it's going to be like 40% THC, which for young people is enough to send you to, frequently, or 90% vapes, THC vapes, send you to the hospital with some psychotic. Everything is so much more potent, just like so much more intense the marketing of pizza and burgers that look like they just had sex, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, it feels like this, that it may be that the traffickers, because of their profit mode, have painted themselves into a increasingly small corner. I don't know, because I don't believe that there's a mastermind behind it all. If you look at the trafficking world in Mexico, it's really, your economics department needs to study this. It's really just one big throbbing free market. We call them cartels. They're not cartels. I mean, I studied economics in school. One thing I do remember from my economics, which is not much, was that that a cartel is a bunch of producers who come together to reduce supply, to force the price up. Well, clearly the opposite is the case. We call them cartels as shorthand. That's not what they are. It's just a throbbing group of people who are all making dope, and then a bunch of people who are buying it from them and selling it. And there's some control when it comes to fighting and stuff like that, but when it comes to production, it really is not. And that's why you see those counterfeit pills, fentanyl pills, everywhere in the country in ghastly quantities. The prices have dropped. Meth is like historic low prices. That does not, if you were an organized cartel, you would not want that. But it's not, that's because they're not an organized cartel, So, but I believe that nature of drug trafficking is what increasingly will make it so that more and more people, certainly in the United States, it would seem to me, would now just kind of increase, like my daughter has pretty much, just like, wow. Of course, my poor daughter is like the 16-year-old who's heard more about this stuff than any 16-year-old in America, for goodness sake, so unfortunately. I'm on to another topic that has nothing to do with this, and she's like, thank God. I don't have to hear about heroin or fentanyl or pain pills or any damn thing, So I think the long term, though, I'm 35 years. You're supposed to be all crusty and cynical as a reporter, 35 years. I kind of really am very hopeful. Actually, that would convince a lot of people just to never, ever be able to use drugs. Just my idea.
Yeah, like push has come to shove type of thing.
I'm sorry?
Like push has come to shove sort of thing, and you can't really risk.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
It's like push has come to shove, the phrase, right, yeah.
Yes.
You can't really risk
Right,
taking
right.
a risk.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Even
Okay.
though they're making huge profits, they're increasingly painting themselves into a corner,
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, thank
So.
you.
More questions? Or are you being told that you can't ask a question? Okay, I'm sorry. Hey there, I see you, Aaron. Thanks for coming, man. Okay. Okay, well, Abe, take it away.
Yeah, unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you so much to Sam. Thank you so much to the audience for your questions.
Thanks so much,
We hope to
guys.
see you again at
Thank
the
you very
App
much.
soon. Good night.